think everybody in this country now realize there is racialism. There is racialism, especially in employment, in offices, and even university degrees and all like that.
My Uncle Tom, he was white. I used to have to go in a back alley, or back entry you would call it, if I wanted to visit my other uncle.
The teachers were overtly racist and treated us accordingly. We weren't treated as individuals. We were treated as a group.
You didn't think that you would be discriminated just because of the colour of your skin.
Whatever they put on the front page, it's always very black youth did. Yeah, so, or black this, black that. It's always something very bad.
Muggers. But if it's white, it's just muggers. I remember playing netball, and in the netball team there was 3 of us called Caroline, and one was called Carol, one was called Kazi, and I was called Sooty. But to me that didn't mean anything. And I remember Dad actually coming along one time to watch me play, and he said to me afterwards, well, why are they calling you Sooty? And I just said, well, Dad, there's 3 of us here, and they have to, you know, choose different names. So he says, well, why couldn't they call you Carol or Kazi? And I said, I don't know. He said, they're only calling you Sooty because you're black. And I said, oh, Dad, don't be stupid. But then I actually took stock and thought about it. Well, maybe he was right. And that's when it hit me that maybe there was such a thing as racism.
The roots of racism were planted long ago. Perhaps it helped to justify the inhumanity of slavery when Africans were shipped as a commodity. The myths about those from the Dark Continent were embellished during Britain's imperial reign. Grace Wilkie, who is now in her 70s, was born in Liverpool to an English mother and African father. She was soon made aware of racism.
The Africans, a lot of them married white women, you see. And I didn't see the harm in marrying somebody if you liked them. And I don't see why anybody else should, you know, and I think it stemmed from there. And it would have caused perhaps their brothers or their fathers to get antagonistic because, you know, it's very hard for you to see your son or your daughter marry into another race.
The war was over in November 1918, and it was just only a few months after when the soldiers and sailors and all demobilized from the army and the armed forces. During the war, there were a lot of jobs. Anybody can get a job if the munition factories was on. Color didn't mind. Black, white, yellow, green hair, everybody can work. But after the job was over and they were all demobilized, the white soldiers, they seemed to forget that the black man was also in the Navy and the Army with them. And they couldn't get the jobs. And the few black men were still working in some of the factories that's not closed yet. And they demanded that these black people would leave the factory so they can get in. They're Englishmen. These black people were savages from Africa. In those days, every black man was supposed to come from Africa. They never thought about the West Indians or anything of the sort. So the race riot started.
My mother told me, when I started to understand what had happened during the riots, she said all the whites and the blacks were fighting, there was cutting, some got arrested, and she was compelled at that time to put me in a tin bath. They used tin baths then, because there weren't a lot of bathrooms, and covered me over with blankets and planks to protect me, because they were throwing bottles, bricks, and anything, you name it, through the window.
A friend and I, a West Indian from St. Lucia, we were going to see a friend in Brownlow Hill, Liverpool this was. And we took the tram to the Adelphi Hotel. And we had to turn right to Brownlow Hill, where the friend we were going to see lived. As we get off the bus, this gang spotted us. Here's some more niggers. Before we knew what was happening, they were chasing us. So we ran like hell. While running, on the left-hand side of Brownlow Hill, I can quite remember it just like yesterday, a woman opened the door. I mean, they were all white women, there were no black women in those days, so my friend and I ran around the corner into the hallway, and we found the door open. We came in, the woman shut the door, and we went upstairs. He made us a cup of tea while she looked through the window to see if everything is all right. And it wasn't long after when she said, okay, you can go now. Now, she saved our lives.
Lives were lost in the riots. Charles Wootton, a young Liverpool seaman, was chased by a mob 200 strong. They threw him into the Queen's Dock and hurled stones at him until he drowned. During the Second World War, racism in Britain appeared to wane. There was a warm welcome for the people of the Caribbean who'd responded to the call to fight fascism. While they were seen as temporary visitors, any displays of overt racism were greeted with repugnance. But it was not to last. When America joined the war in 1942, West Indian soldiers were caught up in a political battle based on prejudice. Britain needed the Americans, but they brought with them their own tradition of racial segregation. Many pubs and dance halls were now off limits to black troops. The Calabar had arrived in Britain.
They used to call him Lazy Bones in Harlem. Lazy, good for nothing all the day. But now they're mighty proud of him in Harlem. Chocolate soldier from the USA.
We met some black guys in a place named Gloucester. When these black guys came here and they saw us and they saw how we live together with the English people, man and woman, that is something unheard of in America.
Well, goodbye, man.
Goodbye. It's been very nice meeting you both.
Glad to have met you, I'm sure.
Funny you should come from Birmingham, too, isn't it? Have you come to my Birmingham, you must come to my home and have a cup of tea with me. Both of you.
Thank you, we will.
Goodbye and good luck.
Goodbye. Bye-bye. Well, where you going?
Well, I think I'll get some cigarettes.
I'm short, too.
Well, I'll get some.
Good. Now, look, men, you heard that conversation. That's not unusual here. It's the sort of thing that happens quite a lot. Now, let's be frank about it. There are colored soldiers as well as white here, and there are less social restrictions in this country. Just what you heard, an English woman asking a colored boy to tea. She was polite about it, and he was polite about it. Now, look, that might not happen at home, but the point is we're not at home. And the point is, too, if we bring a lot of prejudices here, what are we going to do about them?
Black people were forced to do something about prejudice. In 1943, the cricketer Leary Constantine worked with the Ministry of Labour. At a hotel in Russell Square, he was refused a room on the grounds that we're not going to have all these niggers in our hotel. Discrimination was not illegal, but Leary Constantine won a case of personal distress and injury. During the war, such incidents were rare.
After the war, you find quite a difference. Everybody started to go back into the little pigeonholes that they didn't used to. So that really was the difference I found out, the war and peace. And then they'll come back during the war, they say, oh, colored gentlemen come to help us. After the war, they say, why don't you go home?
I think things changes sometime in the late 40s and 50s, more or less in the early 50s. when a lot of people started to come over, you know, and then the people found that they think that they're coming to take their jobs. So then it started to change, gradually it began to change, and then it get out of hand.
Colored people, if you ask me, after the experiences I've had of them, I've had my belly full of them, I can tell you. If you ask me what should be done with them, I'll tell you now. You can get them all out of the country, and as soon as you can get them out, the better I'll be pleased, I'll tell you that.
They're a nuisance when you've got to walk past them in the streets, they won't move. They're a nuisance at work, they won't work. And for folks who got them living by them, they're a more nuisance still.
Well, I think it's pretty awful. I think they should live in a district all to themselves, because I've got to bring this little boy up amongst them, and they're not clean, and the smell of the cooking makes you feel sick. You get the smell of the cooking upstairs in the bedrooms, and then they spit about and use the entry as the toilet.
There are good, realistic reasons why objections have been raised. First of all, the ones of personal habits. It's been said that a coloured worker having his soup in the canteen finds a piece of bone and spits it on the floor. That's something that the average British worker doesn't like. Secondly, too, some of them wash with oil. Oil with a strong smell that can be very unpleasant if you're working close to them. And then, of course, there's the understandable fear that's always present with so many people of what could happen with British girls.
Ignorance causes a multitude of sin. But what I'm saying, the authorities never think of educating the people, whether it's black or white or whatever, but never think to educate the people in the direction which it was essential. If the educational body had started at the early days when that influx of people was coming into this country and educate the people, a lot of things that happen in these latter days would never happen.
Those days you felt more you're out on a limb, like, you know, they said it could have been horrible sometimes, you know. Even as a guard on the train, you would get old ladies coming out. I would try sometime to help them to get on the tube, and you see, shun you. Oh, there's no doubt about that. Those days, I think it was inherent in people for this sort of thing. You know, it's just one of those things. There's no black person. I don't know about Asians and Chinese, but there's no black man that come from no part of the world that tell me that he wasn't at least had some awful example of people who feeling they were better than him. You call it racism as you want, but these people feel they were better than you, and there's no doubt about that.
In the city's dance halls, nobody is barred, but coloured men are not encouraged. He'll be asked to get out if he does much of this.
In the early 50s, black people were barred from many public places. The colour bar had become a British institution. A Tory MP, Cyril Osborne, called for immigration controls against what he called shiploads of lepers. The mood of hatred stirred one of the first of the youth cults, the Teddy Boys.
There was a crowd of Teddy Boys. Those days the Teddy Boys wear these zoot trousers, and all had girls with them too, but they were big news, you know. They used to beat up people and all that, and some black people who were known to have beat up badly and so on. So I was met with this crowd of people in the dark. I don't know if you know Charing Cross Road. In the best of times, those days, it was even worse. I said, Lord have mercy. I felt to sink. Anyhow, they come and they gathered round me, and one of them said words, if I don't remember the words, let's get him or something like that. Well, let's get the black so-and-so. And they started housing me around, and I started hitting out one time. So I pulled off one of my moccasins and started hitting them up. But what is a moccasin shoe? Anyhow, it kept them off. But when I saw that they would have got the happen on me, I took off and left my shoe. One shoe went up and gone. And they ran me from down to the bottom of Charing Cross Road up to Tottenham Court Crossroad. The taxis were by the Dominion taxi, and there were 2 taxis standing there. So I ran and jumped in the taxi. So I was like, but these feet saved me. I run like anything else, man.
In 1956, the Suez Crisis led to oil shortages, queues for petrol, and a minor economic recession. By 1958, 500,000 people were out of work, and black people bore the brunt of the blame.
When we came here first in the 50s, we were all individual from different islands, you know. Jamaican was a Jamaican individual, Trinidadian was, Barbadian was, African was, you know, we was all individual. But when the 1958 riot started, we found that they didn't specialize who they said they attack. They attack Jamaicans, anybody, while you're black. So we found that we can only unite by getting together and cut out the individualism. So then we all united then and decided to stand together and fight. And that's what caused us to get together, that riot in 1958.
It's the 25th of August. I was keeping a dance in Bletchley Street. While we were there, I heard like a swarm of bees coming along the road. And I went upstairs, opened the door and looked out, and I saw this crowd coming along with the police in front. And then they stopped by the house where the party was keeping. And the police came, talked to me. He's asked me to stop the music, so I says, why? He says, well, these people is in for trouble. So we said, well, we're enjoying ourselves. We're not making any trouble with anyone. And in saying that, start to hear brick and iron and all those things start to come through the windows. The next morning, race riots started.
The riots came about being Swaziwell Mosley from the Unionist Party, who defended Hitler, and he was a fascist, a stinking fascist at that too, was a candidate for North Kensington.
He's a jolly good fellow, he's a jolly good fellow, and so say all of us, and so say all of us.
When Swaziwell came out with the idea that North Kensington must be kept white, that was a chariot thrown before us. When we came here, we were only looking a work and a shelter over one's head.
You see, we had was to protect our women folks, because they would just see a black woman walking down the street and box her down.
It did affect me emotionally, mentally. It did trouble me a little, you know, because I don't know when they're going to strike and we're going to strike. So that's the point that worries me. And plus, my wife was here, and then I was, you know, I was quite worried sometimes when I go into work and leave her.
We use the same methods that they were using. They bring violence, so we go to it with violence. And then the police comes in, and we couldn't walk 2 or 3 of us together. If we do, we're going to get stopped and searched. And such like, well, it lasts for about a week. Not straight on in the fashion in which it started, but little by little until it just phases out.
I'll say this now. It started in Little Rock in America. But when we actually saw it came to us here in Notting Hill, we realize now that, well, if you mean business, let us go to business.
Our headquarters was number 9 Blenheim Crescent. And we get all our Molotov cocktail bombs and things like that ready there.
When I look out through the window, I saw them, a multitude of people, and they says, what? Let's lynch the niggers. Let's burn the niggers. And from that word was mentioned, Only see Molotov cocktail bombs coming left, right, and center. And they started to panic. And with that panic, the gate of number 9 was open. And I says, boy, throw them back where they are coming from, which we did.
Nationally, the reaction was outrage at the violence rather than the racism. The courts were lenient with many of the youths who'd roamed the streets nigger hunting. But there were exceptions. At the Old Bailey, Justice Salmon jailed 9 men for 4 years each. He told them, everyone, irrespective of the color of their skin, is entitled to walk through our streets erect and free from fear.
Norman Manley came over here during that period, Chief Minister of Jamaica, to put things right with us. So there and then, we made it our business to see Manley as our Chief Minister. So I told Manley, I says, well, I'd like you to take a fact-finding tour and see what you see within the community and see the behavior, especially of the police.
Mr. Manley, now you've had a chance to consider all that you've seen and heard this week. What do you think was the main cause of all this trouble? Was it basically a matter of racial prejudice?
I think it is. I admit, quite frankly, that there are a lot of particular local causes, housing problems, difference of habits, fears about employment, teddy boy activity. But I think we ought to face the basic fact that color and race prejudice is the only thing that could have made these things end in disorders of this sort.
Distrust lingered in the streets of Notting Hill. 8 months after the riots, a Trinidadian, Kelso Cochran, was surrounded by a white gang while walking home at night. He was stabbed to death.
Because of the militant stand we put up, Kelso was ambushed and was being killed by several of those teddy boys. I attended the funeral, and there were thousands of people there because of the way he was killed, and knowing that he was killed by these animals. It was definitely racism that has caused the riot. Keep Britain white. And I was determined that Britain will never be kept white because we are here now. So how the hell am I here going to tell me? So to keep it white, then you have to kill me then and carry me out on the bloody box.
These West Indians were among the last to arrive at Southampton before immigration was controlled.
The political push for immigration control eventually won the day. The predominant view was that restricting entry would ease racial conflict. The numbers game had begun. 1962 saw the first of a string of immigration laws which were to be further tightened by Labour.
This country is not alone. Every other country seeks to control immigration. But the problem, however, in this country is that it seems that the immigration acts in recent times, in the 60s and 70s, and in fact we've had another one, the Immigration Act of 1988, they have tended to have an inbuilt racism, if you like, or discrimination. And some people think that the discrimination has been institutionalized in this respect.
Black people already settled in Britain also faced discrimination, especially at work. Many West Indians came with skills, but employers generally gave them menial jobs that white people didn't want. Some trade union branches tried to restrict the numbers of black workers. The arguments against employing black people were contradictory. On the one hand, there was said to be a cheap pool of labour who brought down wages. On the other, that they were lazy. Discrimination was commonplace.
For instance, I applied for jobs. And when I went to the job, they said, sorry, the vacancy is full. You know, they exchanged me to a job. He phoned the company before, he did a vacancy, yes. He said, I'm selling over somebody, and he didn't explain to who it was. And when I went there, I was told the vacancy is filled.
Same thing happened when I qualified, and first I decided and I was looking for a job, a permanent job. And always they were telling me that I was either overqualified or too experienced or too old. So it was racism manifesting itself in that indirect way.
Something is holding me back. Is it because I'm black? Something is holding me back. I'm wondering if it's because I'm black.
The 1964 general election saw a watershed in the politics of race. Labour narrowly won the national election after 13 years in opposition, but one of their most senior MPs lost his Black Country seat, Smethwick.
Triumphant Tories were accused by Labour of having cynically exploited racial prejudice among whites to swing the vote. Tory candidate Peter Griffith derided Labour's Gordon Walker for trying to ignore the race issue, which he said was easy to do if you lived in Hampstead Garden suburb, but less easy if you lived in Smethwick.
I do believe that once the hysteria of the last few weeks has gone, we shall see that Smethwick was a beacon of hope at this last election. A town like Smethwick made up its own mind, took no notice of the opinion polls and the surveys, made up its own mind on the issues, and chose regardless of gratuitous advice from outside.
The period when Peter Griffith stood as a candidate, and the racism was so naked and raw as far as British politics was concerned, that, I mean, they were openly saying and preaching that if you want a nigger for your neighbour, vote Labour. And that's how Patrick Gordon Walker lost his seat. And at that time, racism, you know, was becoming so, it was becoming acceptable that there was nothing wrong in people saying, you know, that they're a racist. That which is something coming from the Caribbean we found very, very difficult to accept and to understand. And none of the parties at that time were prepared to come out and say something or do anything.
Smethwick showed there were votes in race. Labour believed that restricting immigration while outlawing some forms of discrimination would achieve good race relations, while a former Tory minister responsible for recruiting West Indian nurses seemed concerned for them.
Perhaps the greater part of the present coloured immigrants and their families do not yet regard this country as a place of permanent settlement. Here lies the crucial importance for you and me, and no less for those among the immigrants whose future does lie here, of that policy of assisted repatriation and resettlement which Sir Alec Douglas Hume, as leader of our party, adopted almost 4 years ago. To proclaim that policy, and when we have the opportunity to put it into effect with generosity, with humanity, with determination,
and with hope is a duty which we owe to all, white and coloured.
You see that man, Enoch Powell? I'm not sort of getting on this television program to say things that will be personal to people. But I think this man is a bit... To say things that he say on TV, I think is beyond comprehension. Whether you hate black people, or whether you hate Chinese, or whether you hate any human being, if he had any knowledge of what repatriating, say, my twins to a place like Dominica, where they can't identify themselves even with their immediate family, even with their mothers, sisters and brothers, they find it hard to identify with them. In fact, everything, they come from a place like Scotland, which is so much different in culture. His plan is like sending them to death warrant.
In his Rivers of Blood speech, Enoch Powell predicted an immigrant invasion.
I spoke about the deep fears and resentments which leads to violence.
I told Mr. Powell that he could not remain a member of the Shadow Cabinet because of the inflammatory nature of his speech at Birmingham.
We ought to stop all immigration into this country, and if any immigrant wants to go back home, then we would help subsidize him to go back home. Now that's all Enoch Powell said.
What Enoch Powell said was right. We say there's enough of them.
The sense of alarm and of resentment lie not with the immigrant population, but with those among whom they have come and are still coming.
This man saying things like that, I hope he redresses that before he dies, you know. He should redress it, you know, because it's not nice to say things, to incite things to happen, because we have something to contribute here. I'm sure of that.
One experience I have never forgotten. It was a very small matter. On a Saturday, I had done the shopping. It was bitterly cold, and I was carrying 2 luggages in both hands. And I met this elderly Englishman. He looked at my face, and I'm quite sure he didn't like it one bit. And the comment he made spoke volumes for itself. He said to me, "Why don't you go back to your country?" I didn't ask him anything. He just ventured that advice. It's little things like this which often could get you down.
60% of English people suffering from personal pride, fear. Because you have done so much bad things to us in the past. You believe we get on top going to do the same thing back again. Fear, that's what's killing you a lot. Fear and ignorance. Ignorance and fear. Intelligent fools you lot you are. You're going to cut because of the color of the skin. What can you do about this?
Nothing.
Then why you worry about it then, go?
Oh, don't worry about it, mate.
What can you do about it?
I'll work for you.
You work for everybody.
I remember a woman actually coming up to my mother and saying, "Oh, Miss Hibbert, how do you manage to keep, your daughters looking so nicely dressed?" And, it was as if they expected us to go to school wearing rags or something. But I mean, we were well turned out. I mean, you made sure you were well turned out when you went to school.
Made sure we were well turned
out. She made sure we were well turned out when we went to school. But then when she came up and said to my mum, I thought to myself, my God, everybody must know about us.
No, I didn't really think anything of it because it was habit.
But when she came up and said that to Mum, it clicked to me. I thought to myself, she wouldn't have gone and said that to anybody else. Why would she come? It was like, it was like a shock that Mum actually had us turned out so well every morning, It was weird.
The 1970s saw the re-emergence of the far right. A party known solely for its stance on race was now gaining support.
Fellow members of the National Front, the impact of our movement on the public of this country has been greater than at any time in our 10-year history.
Their marches often ended in violence, but their share of the vote increased, especially in local elections. Race was on the political agenda yet again.
There was a committee which looked at it and said that if we went on as we are, then by the end of the century there'd be 4 million people from the new Commonwealth or Pakistan here. Now that's an awful lot, and I think it means that people are really rather afraid that this country might be rather swamped by people with a different culture. And you know, the British character has done so much for democracy, for law, and done so much throughout the world, that if there's any fear that it might be swamped, people are going to react and be rather hostile to those coming in.
The hostility was already in place. People defined by the colour of their skin lived with the fear of racial attack, and every day they encounter with abuse and bigotry.
I'd be walking and people say, hey, you black bee, this kind of thing. And I would get all kind of scared. But then as time went on, the scaredness ended up being angerness. So I started getting into things like martial arts stuff so that I could back myself up. And it's helped me up to now, and I'm not going to regret any of it. I'm not going to say I'm a violent guy, but I'm not going to say I'm a pacifist. Because it's one thing, if somebody says to me, hey, black man, that's stepping on me, as far as I'm concerned. Noel's different, he'd rather kind of walk away. A lot of people would rather walk away, because it hurts me that much, and it really annoys me that much if people say that to me.
I think a lot of white people have preconceived ideas about what black people are supposed to be like, the way they talk, the way they dress, their behaviour, etc. And I think from the way that we've been brought up, the way our schooling, etc., I think in that way I've tried to fight it and decide, well, I'm not going to be like what I'm not going to be what they expect me to be. I'm going to be totally different.
People think about individuals and individual actions, and that being the problem. So people say, well, I'm not racist. I mean, you know, some of my best friends and all of that, and therefore fail to see the systematic disadvantage that black people face in this country. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about institutional racism. That built into the way aspects of this society work is the assumption, often unstated, but the assumption that black people, their interests, their perceptions, the things that they do are less important, of less value.
Many black communities became increasingly disillusioned with their treatment by the institutions of Britain. The symbol of authority they most frequently came into contact with was the police. The relationship became strained through growing mutual distrust.
The police themselves are geared towards suppressing anything which threatens to change the established order, whether culturally or even socially. The key thing to recognize is that the police in this country, by design or by default, have been seriously guilty of a systematic violation of black people's human rights.
Black people were particularly aggrieved by the use of the Sus Law. It seemed to epitomize racism. A law first passed in 1824 to control vagrants, it gave the police the power to arrest people merely on the suspicion that they were loitering with the intention of committing a crime. It now seemed to be targeted at black people.
There was sus laws where you were just picked off the street for no reason whatsoever. On many occasions I remember walking down the street, you see 4 white guys jump out the car and ask you your name and address for no reason whatsoever. No warrant cards were produced, or any other form of identification, and no reason was actually given. If you ask anyone in this community, they've had a dealing with the police at some level.
When I was 61 years of age, I was arrested, being drunk and disorderly. I was surrounded with police. 2 policewomen. What's the commotion? I said, there is no commotion. They said, you're causing a disturbance. I said, where? So I had leaned back on the car, you know. And I said, you know, just let us go peacefully. So what happens next is that I'm getting dragged by the arm and twisted. Then I got a kick on my shin. So I got bad-tempered then, you see, and I swore. And I said, you know, don't kick me anyway. And my son jumped in, you know, he said, leave my mother, you know, let go of her. So that he then was held. And before we knew where we were, there was a big van as well as the small one, all sorts of police surrounding us. They charged me with drunken disorderly and assault on 3 police officers. And the jury returned a verdict of not guilty.
They want to give that tag to everyone. They've got a criminal record. That's a thing I have noticed. I resent that very strongly. The police were very racist, and they probably still are.
I quickly dealt with racism and said, look, this isn't a problem of mine. This isn't a problem of black people. It's a white problem.
Looking at our local situations and looking at the police as an institution and as a force, because although people in the Metropolitan Police would like to convince us through some of the advertising, and some of it's quite good, that they're no longer a force but a service, you don't service people to death, you force them to death, and we're still dying.
Fury intensified when a 19-year-old man, Colin Roach, was found dead inside a police station.
Colin Roach went to Stoke Newington Police Station in 1983. He was driven there by a friend. The friend didn't know why he wanted to go there, and shortly after that he was dead, killed by a sawn-off shotgun, which was apparently placed in his mouth and the trigger pulled. And the police immediately notified the press to say that a young black man with a history of mental illness had committed suicide. Now, that's without any notion of his previous medical history. That's without any investigation of the shooting which took place. On the same day that Colin Roach died, his father was taken to the police station later on. He arrived round about 12 midnight. Colin Roach is supposed to have died somewhere about 11:30. And Colin Roach's father was questioned for 3 to 4 hours about Colin Roach before he was told his son was dead. Now, that was something which greatly distressed the father, and when it became widely known, angered many other people.
College would not kill himself, so we all must pull together. We all are blacks. We all got to pull together.
After the death, a number of Colin's friends and associates, young black people, mounted their own demonstration. They didn't have a public meeting. They didn't have any sort of mysterious left-wing ghost coming in to inspire them. They mounted their own demonstration outside Stoke Newington Police Station, clamoring, demanding that thing we always seem to demand these days, a public inquiry.
How did he die? Why did the police tell us that it was suicide? Silence! Silence! Hollywood police, sir! Silence! Cuban police, sir! Silence! Western police, sir! Silence! Shame! 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 Shame!
The inquest into the death of Colin Roach decided he had committed suicide. The verdict caused despair, and the relationship with the police deteriorated even further. Anger and frustration exploded when Cherry Gross was shot by a policeman. They'd broken into her home looking for her son. He wasn't there. A police inspector was acquitted of unlawfully wounding her. Her son was given a suspended sentence for possessing a sawn-off shotgun. Cherry Gross was left paralyzed.
If I had a son, it could happen to me. It could be my son, and it could be my son that the police was looking for. And I would have done the same thing as she did. And I would get shot just as she did. So it came over to me just... That's my, you know, I carry that around in me for months. Well, I'm still carrying it, because every time I remember it, or I see her, I felt it so deep down that could be me.
If you look at the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, you'll probably find that there are at least 4 of those articles on human rights which the police systematically and flagrantly violate. And one of the key ones is the right of people to liberty and personal safety without there being a threat to them.
People felt threatened when an unexplained fire swept through a party in London's New Cross.
13 dead and nothing said. Oh, what we gonna do? 13 dead and nothing said. Oh, what this world is coming to.
People felt that the police were dragging their feet on the whole issue, and so frustration set in, and then they had people's anger to deal with.
What I remember about the New Cross massacre, and what really sticks in my mind, is the fact that when the fire happened, after the fire happened, I cannot remember Maggie Thatcher or even the Queen sending any sort of condolences, because it was black. That's how I felt, because it was black. But I remember not so long after that there was a fire somewhere else, and all the condolences were sent by Maggie Thatcher, like as soon as it happened, and the Queen. Now, that to me is a form of racism. Why was it not sent to us? Is it because we were black, or is it just we were just overlooked?
Well, you know, I suppose she just sees it as another black party. You know, we love our parties, and whatever happened in that fire was our own fault, so it wasn't an accident or anything like that, so they don't look at it as any kind of tragedy.
It's just like we weren't important.